It's funny, the things you notice when your world ends. Not the big cinematic explosions you see in movies, but the silence. The oppressive, deafening silence of a house that was once filled with the chaotic symphony of a family. I'm sitting on the floor of what used to be our living room, my back against the cold drywall. The movers took the last of the furniture this morning. Her furniture. I didn't have the heart or the right to claim any of it. All that's left is the ghost of an indentation in the carpet where our sofa used to be, a sofa where we'd cuddle with the kids, watching cartoons on a Saturday morning. The air smells of cardboard and dust, a sterile scent that has replaced the familiar aroma of her perfume and the faint, sweet smell of baby shampoo from our daughter's hair. Just a week ago, this room was the vibrant heart of our universe. Now it's a hollowed-out cavern, an echo chamber for my regrets. My phone buzzes on the floor beside me, a relentless vibration against the hardwood. It's probably another lawyer or a creditor or maybe a journalist looking for a vulture's eye view of the carcass of my life. I don't even look. The screen is a black mirror reflecting a man I don't recognize, his face a roadmap of sleepless nights and hollowed-out dreams. They called me a wunderkind, a visionary. The boy genius who'd built a $10 million tech startup from his garage. It wasn't quite a garage, it was a cramped spare bedroom, but the media loved the narrative. And for a while I loved it too, I breathed it, I became it. The company was my first child, a demanding, brilliant, all-consuming creation. We developed an AI-driven logistics platform that revolutionized supply chain management. It sounds boring, but in the tech world it was poetry. It was elegant, efficient, and incredibly profitable. The initial seed funding, the Series A, the breathless articles in tech journals, it was a blur of upward momentum. I remember the day we hit the $10 million valuation. We weren't even public yet. My business partner, a man I'd trusted like a brother, slapped me on the back, his eyes gleaming with the same manic energy that fueled me. We were on top of the world. That night I came home and showed her the numbers on a tablet. My wife, the love of my life. She looked at the screen, a dizzying string of zeros, and then she looked at me. She smiled, that soft, genuine smile that could always anchor me, but I saw a flicker of something else in her eyes. Concern? Fear? I dismissed it as her natural caution. She was the one who managed our family budget with meticulous care, the one who always insisted on having a robust insurance policy for everything. While I was chasing unicorns, she was making sure our foundation was solid. She was the quiet, unsung architect of our life, while I was the public-facing genius. I bought her a car, a diamond necklace, things I thought were symbols of my success, of my love. She accepted them with grace, but what she really wanted was my time. And that was the one commodity I was perpetually short on. The kids, I see their faces in the smudges on the wall. My son's crayon masterpiece, a chaotic swirl of blue and green that he called a monster hugging a tree. My daughter's tiny handprints in a patch of dust on the window pane. I was the weekend dad, the fun dad who would swoop in with expensive toys and grand adventures, trying to compensate for the nightly bedtime stories I missed, the school plays I watched on a recorded video because I was in a meeting in a different time zone. I told myself it was for them. This relentless drive, this obsession with growth, it was all to build a fortress for them, a life so secure, so buffered by wealth that they would never have to know the meaning of struggle. The irony is a physical pain, a sharp, twisting knife in my gut. I built them a fortress of cards, the mistake. It's all anyone wants to talk about, the fatal mistake. It wasn't a single, isolated event, but the culmination of 1,000 tiny moments of hubris. It started with an idea pitched by my partner. He found a new venture, a cryptocurrency startup specializing in decentralized finance protocols. It was high risk, high reward, the kind of move that could catapult our net worth into the stratosphere. He called it the next evolution of finance, a way to make our already impressive income feel like chump change. He painted a picture of true passive income, of a future where our money worked for us so we wouldn't have to. I was intrigued. The stock market felt slow, pedestrian. The steady growth of our startup felt predictable. I'd grown addicted to the thrill of the vertical climb, and this new venture promised a rocket ship. We talked about risk management, but it was a fleeting, superficial conversation. When you're winning, you start to believe you can't lose. You see risk as an abstract concept for other, less intelligent people. We decided to make a significant investment. But to get the kind of stake we wanted, the kind that would give us a seat on their board, we needed more capital than we had liquid. And that's when the truly fatal part of the mistake was born. My partner suggested we leverage a portion of our company's assets. It was a bold, borderline reckless move. It meant using our stable, successful startup as collateral for a speculative bet on the notoriously volatile crypto market. It was like pawning the family home to bet on a single spin of the roulette wheel. I remember hesitating for a moment. A small, sane voice in the back of my mind whispered that this was a terrible idea. I thought of my wife, of her cautious nature, of the stable, diversified investment portfolio she'd always advocated for. But my partner's enthusiasm was infectious. He framed it as a strategic play, a calculated risk. He said the greatest entrepreneurs weren't the ones who avoided risk, but the ones who managed it. And in my arrogance, I believed I could manage anything. I didn't tell her. That was my second betrayal. I knew she would have talked me out of it. I could picture her face, the way her brow would furrow, the way she would patiently and logically list all the reasons it was a bad idea. She would have spoken about our budget, our long-term goals, the security of our children. And she would have been right. So I hid it from her. I created a separate world, a shadow life where I was a high-stakes gambler playing with the foundations of our existence. The initial results were intoxicating. The value of the crypto startup skyrocketed. On paper, we had doubled our investment in a matter of weeks. The numbers were unreal, a digital fortune that felt like a video game score. My partner and I would toast with expensive whiskey in our gleaming office, feeling like kings of the universe. I started spending more, living louder, the secret success fueling my ego. I bought a bigger house in a more exclusive neighborhood, telling my wife it was a reward for the company's success. She was happy, but that flicker of concern in her eyes never truly went away. It was as if she could sense the lie, the instability humming just beneath the polished surface of our perfect life. The first crack appeared on a Tuesday. I remember the color of the sky was an indifferent, washed-out gray. A small news report online, a security breach in a major crypto exchange. It had nothing to do with our startup directly, but it sent a tremor through the entire market. Bitcoin, the bellwether, dipped. Then it plunged. My partner called me, his voice a little too casual. "Just market volatility," he said. "A healthy correction, we hold." But I could hear the tightness in his voice. I spent the entire day glued to the charts, the red lines slashing downwards like bloody wounds. The millions we had made vanished in a matter of hours. By evening, our initial investment was underwater. The feeling was a cold dread that started in my stomach and spread through my veins, turning my blood to ice. That night I came home late. The house was quiet. She was waiting for me in the kitchen, a cup of tea steaming in her hands. She didn't even have to ask. She looked at my face and she knew. "Something's wrong," she said. It wasn't a question. I tried to lie, to downplay it. "Just a tough day on the stock market," I mumbled, avoiding her eyes, but she saw right through me. She had always been able to read me, to see the man behind the persona. "It's more than that," she insisted, her voice soft but firm. "You've been different for months, distant, jittery. What did you do?" The argument that followed was the worst we'd ever had. It wasn't loud or violent. It was quiet, and that made it so much more brutal. I confessed. I told her about the crypto investment, about leveraging the company. I watched the color drain from her face. I saw her love and trust for me curdle into something I had never seen before, contempt. "You gambled with our children's future," she whispered, her voice shaking with a cold fury. "You gambled with everything we built." I had no defense. She was right. The days that followed were a waking nightmare. The crypto market didn't just correct, it imploded. The startup we had invested in was exposed as a massive fraud, a house of cards built on hype and stolen code. The founders vanished. The investment was gone, all of it. But the real horror, the final, killing blow, came when our creditors called in the loan. With the crypto startup worthless, the assets of our tech company, my company, were now forfeit. The company I had bled for, the one I had sacrificed my family for, was gone. It was seized, broken up, and sold for parts to cover the debt I had incurred. The news broke online, and my phone started melting down. The visionary had become a pariah overnight. The $10 million wunderkind was now the billion-dollar idiot. But the worst part of that day, the moment that will be seared into my memory forever, was not the loss of the company or the money. It was coming home to find her in the hallway, surrounded by suitcases. The kids were in the car, their faces pressed against the glass, their eyes wide and confused. She didn't cry, she didn't scream, she just looked at me with a profound, soul-crushing disappointment. "I can't do this anymore," she said, her voice flat, devoid of all emotion. "I can't live with a man I don't know and I don't trust. The children deserve better. They deserve a father, not a gambler." She slid her wedding ring off her finger and placed it on the hall table. The small metallic click echoed in the sudden silence of the house. I tried to speak, to beg, to promise I would fix it. But the words wouldn't come. What could I say? What promise could I make that wasn't already a lie? I had broken the one thing that was truly priceless, her faith in me. I just stood there, paralyzed, as she walked out the door, closing it softly behind her. I didn't run after her. I just stood there in the empty hallway of our empty house and listened to the sound of the car engine fading into the distance, taking my entire world with it. That was a week ago. It feels like a lifetime. The silence she left behind is a living thing. It breathes in the dust motes dancing in the slivers of sunlight. It whispers from the empty rooms. It screams in the dead of night. I lost my company. I lost my fortune. But that's just noise. The real loss, the one that has hollowed me out completely, is the silence where my family used to be. I am sitting here on the floor of a house that is no longer a home, a bankrupt man in every sense of the word. And for the first time in a very, very long time, I have absolutely no idea what to do next. The climb to the top was exhilarating, a frantic, breathless scramble. But the fall. The fall is slow and quiet, and it gives you far too much time to think about every single mistake you made on the way down. And I have nothing but time. The first few days after she left were a blur of logistics and humiliation. It's a strange thing, dismantling a life. It's not just about packing boxes, it's about confronting the physical evidence of your failure. Every object tells a story. The ridiculous, oversized espresso machine I bought because I thought it made me look like a successful tech mogul, sold online for a fraction of its price. The designer suits hanging in my closet like the empty skins of a different man, donated to a charity that helps men get back into the workforce. The irony was not lost on me. My business partner was gone, vanished. His phone went straight to voicemail. His apartment was empty. The authorities were looking for him, but I knew he was long gone, probably on a beach somewhere with a new identity, living off the money he'd siphoned off before the collapse. He was the architect of the scheme, but I was the enabler. I was the one who signed the papers, who blinded myself with greed and ego. The betrayal was a bitter pill to swallow, but it was nothing compared to the self-loathing that consumed me. The lawyers were like sharks, circling, their voices a droning monotone of legal jargon that all translated to the same thing: you have nothing left. The bankruptcy proceedings were a public flaying. Every financial decision I had ever made was dissected, every extravagance held up as proof of my recklessness. My face was plastered across financial news websites, a cautionary tale for aspiring entrepreneurs. I stopped answering my phone, stopped looking at the internet. I retreated into the shell of my empty house, a ghost haunting the scene of his own death. Friends, I quickly learned the difference between business associates and real friends. The ones who called were mostly looking for gossip, a morbid curiosity about the spectacular crash. The real friends, the ones I had neglected for years in my obsessive pursuit of success, they were the ones who just showed up. One of them, a guy I'd known since college, came over with a bag of groceries and a six-pack of beer. He didn't say much. He just sat with me in the silent living room on the floor, and we drank in silence. It was the most human connection I'd felt in days. He didn't offer advice or judgment. He just offered his presence. It was a lifeline. I started to notice the small things again, the details I had been blind to when my world was a whirlwind of meetings and spreadsheets. The way the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the bare wooden floors. The sound of birds outside the window, a cheerful, oblivious melody. These were things that had always been there, but I had never had the silence to hear them. My first attempt to contact her was a disaster. I called, my hand shaking, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. She answered, her voice wary, guarded. I started to ramble, a pathetic torrent of apologies and excuses and desperate promises. I could hear the weariness in her sigh. "I need time," she said, and her voice was gentle, which was somehow worse than anger. "The children need stability. They are confused and they are scared. You did this. You need to fix yourself before you can even think about being a father to them." She was right. I was a mess, a walking wreck of a man. What could I possibly offer my children in this state? I was a source of fear and instability, the monster who had broken their home. The court had granted her temporary full custody, and I was allowed supervised video calls twice a week. The first call was excruciating. My son, who was only 6, asked me when I was coming home. He asked if I was mad at him. My daughter, who was 4, just looked at me with her big, sad eyes and didn't say a word. I tried to smile to be the fun dad they remembered, but it felt like a grotesque mask. I could see my wife in the background, her face a carefully neutral mask, her presence a constant reminder of my failure. I ended the call and broke down, a raw, guttural sob that tore through the silence of the house. I had thought losing the money was the bottom. I was wrong. The bottom was seeing the fear and confusion in my own children's eyes and knowing that I was the one who put it there. The days bled into one another, a monotonous cycle of waking up to a crushing weight of regret and going to sleep hoping not to dream. I had to sell the house, of course. The bank owned it now. I had a few weeks to clear out my personal belongings. Walking through the rooms, deciding what to keep, was like picking through the wreckage of a plane crash. A photograph of our wedding day, her face radiant with a joy I felt I had stolen. A tiny pair of sneakers caked in mud from my son's first attempt at playing soccer. A finger painting from my daughter taped to the fridge. These were the things that mattered, not the expensive watches or the first edition books I'd collected. Just these small, priceless fragments of a life I had shattered. I packed them into a single cardboard box. Everything else I left behind. The day I handed over the keys was surreal. I took one last walk through the empty house, my footsteps echoing like a funeral dirge. I remembered the day we moved in, how she had run from room to room, her laughter bouncing off the walls, how we had made plans for a future that now felt like a cruel joke. I closed the door behind me and didn't look back. I was homeless, jobless, and broken. I had the clothes on my back, a box of memories, and a debt so large it felt like a physical object I had to carry everywhere. I stayed on my friend's couch for a while. He never made me feel like a burden, but the shame was a constant companion. I was a 35-year-old man who had been on the cover of magazines, and now I was sleeping on a lumpy sofa in a one-bedroom apartment. I started looking for a job. It was a humbling experience. My name was now toxic in the tech and finance worlds. No one would touch me. My resume was a testament to a spectacular failure. I applied for everything. Office jobs, sales jobs, retail jobs. I went to interviews in a borrowed suit, trying to project a confidence I didn't feel. The interviewers would look at my resume, then look at me, their eyes filled with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. They didn't see a candidate, they saw a story. It was during this time that I truly understood the meaning of a budget. When you have millions, money is an abstract concept. You don't think about the price of coffee or the cost of a bus ticket. When you have nothing, every cent matters. I learned to cook simple meals, to take the bus instead of a cab, to find pleasure in a free walk in the park instead of an expensive dinner. My world had shrunk, but in doing so, it had become more real, more tangible. I was no longer living in the abstract world of venture capital and stock options. I was living in the real world of rent and groceries, and in a strange way, it was grounding. The video calls with the kids were still the hardest part of my week. I tried to focus on them, to ask about their school, their friends, to be present in the moment. But the screen was a constant barrier, a reminder of the distance I had created. My son started acting out in school. My wife told me this in a clipped, tense email. He was getting into fights, being defiant. He missed his father. He missed his home. Each word was a fresh turn of the knife in my gut. I knew I was the cause of his pain. I wanted to fix it, to hold him and tell him everything would be okay, but I couldn't. All I could do was try to be a calm, stable presence on a flickering screen twice a week. I had to find a way to rebuild, not for myself, but for them. I had to prove to my wife and to myself that I was more than my biggest failure. I had to find a way to become the man she had married, not the arrogant fool I had become. The path forward was terrifyingly unclear. The fortress I had built was rubble. The map I had been following had led me off a cliff. I was standing in the ruins with nothing but the dust of my old life on my hands. And yet, for the first time, I felt a flicker of something that wasn't despair. It was a tiny, fragile spark of resolve. I had lost everything I thought was important. Maybe, just maybe, that meant I was finally free to discover what truly was. The journey back would not be about reclaiming my fortune or my status. It would be about reclaiming my humanity, my integrity, and the love of the family I had so carelessly thrown away. It was a journey I had to take, one painful, uncertain step at a time. I finally found a job. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't in a gleaming high-rise office with panoramic city views. It was in the windowless basement of a small insurance company, a data entry position. My boss was a man 10 years younger than me who had no idea who I was, and I was grateful for the anonymity. The work was mind-numbing, a repetitive task of transferring numbers from one spreadsheet to another. My former self would have scoffed at such a job. I used to design the systems that made jobs like this obsolete. Now I was the obsolete one, but I was surprisingly okay with it. The monotony was a strange kind of solace. It required no ego, no grand vision, no risk management. It just required me to show up and do the work. It was honest. And at the end of every 2 weeks, I received a paycheck. It was a fraction of what I used to make in an hour, but holding it in my hand, I felt a sense of pride I hadn't felt in years. This was money I had earned, not through some speculative bet or clever algorithm, but through simple, consistent effort. It was real. With my first few paychecks, I found a place of my own. It was a tiny studio apartment above a laundromat. It smelled faintly of detergent and damp clothes, and the spin cycle of the machines below would gently vibrate the floor. It was a world away from the architectural marvel I had called home, but it was mine. I bought a mattress, a cheap desk, and a single chair. I had my box of memories, and for the first time since the collapse, I felt a sliver of stability. I started to build a routine: wake up, go to work, come home, cook a simple dinner, read a book from the local library. It was a Spartan existence, but it was peaceful. The constant, gnawing anxiety that had been my companion for months began to recede, replaced by a quiet weariness. I was too tired to be anxious. I was focused on the simple task of surviving one day at a time. The video calls with the kids started to get better. I had a new rule for myself: never make a promise I couldn't keep. I stopped talking about a grand future where everything would be fixed. Instead, I focused on the now. I helped my son with his math homework over the screen, cheering him on when he got a problem right. I listened to my daughter sing a song she learned in preschool, my heart aching with a mixture of joy and sadness. I was no longer the fun, distant dad. I was just dad, the one who showed up even if it was just on a screen. I was consistent. I was present. Slowly, a new kind of connection began to form. My wife and I started communicating more, mostly through text messages about the kids. The anger in her messages was slowly replaced by a neutral, business-like tone. We were co-parents, partners in the most important startup of all. I never pushed for more. I knew the trust I had shattered couldn't be glued back together with words. It could only be rebuilt, brick by painful brick, through action. I started paying child support. The amount was determined by the court, and it took up almost half of my meager salary. Handing over that money each month was a tangible act of responsibility. It wasn't a grand gesture, not a diamond necklace or a luxury car. It was insurance, school lunches, and new shoes. It was me finally taking care of my family in the most fundamental way. I began to think about money differently. I had spent my life chasing wealth, believing that a large number in a bank account equated to security and happiness. Now I saw money for what it was: a tool to provide shelter, food, and stability. I created a budget, a real one, on a piece of paper taped to my wall. I tracked every dollar. I started a small savings account, putting away a tiny amount from each paycheck. It was laughable compared to my old investment portfolio, but it was a start. It was a seed of a new foundation, one built not on risky bets, but on discipline and patience. One evening, my old friend, the one who had brought me groceries, came to visit my new apartment. He looked around the small room at the single chair and the mattress on the floor, and he smiled. "You know," he said, "I've never seen you look so calm." He was right. The constant pressure was gone. The need to impress, to grow, to conquer had vanished. In losing everything, I had been freed from the crushing weight of my own ambition. We talked for hours, not about business or the stock market, but about life, about books, about our shared memories from college. It was a simple, easy conversation, the kind I hadn't had in a decade. I realized how much I had missed these moments of genuine human connection, moments that had been crowded out by my relentless pursuit of success. I started going for long walks. I explored the city on foot, with no destination in mind. I discovered parks I never knew existed, small neighborhood cafes with amazing coffee, quiet streets lined with old trees. I started to see the world around me, not as a landscape for my ambition, but as a place to simply be. I was learning to live a smaller, slower, and more deliberate life. There were still bad days, days when the weight of my regret was so heavy I could barely get out of bed. Days when I would see a family in the park and be consumed by a wave of grief so intense it stole my breath. The ghosts of my past were never far away. The memory of my partner's betrayal, the shame of the bankruptcy, the look on my wife's face as she left, these were wounds that would likely scar. But I was learning to live with the scars. They were a part of my story, a constant reminder of the man I never wanted to be again. One Saturday, I got a text from her. It was a picture of our son holding up a trophy. He had won a soccer tournament. "He was asking for you," the text read. My heart leaped. It was the first time she had offered a piece of information about the kids that wasn't purely logistical. I texted back, "Tell him I'm so proud of him, he looks so happy." A few minutes later, another message came through. "He gets his determination from you." I stared at the phone, reading the words over and over. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't an invitation back into her life, but it was a crack of light in the darkness. It was an acknowledgement of a past that wasn't all bad, a recognition that the man she had once loved was still in there somewhere, buried beneath the rubble of my mistakes. That night, I didn't feel like a failure. I didn't feel like a fraud or a pariah. I felt like a father who had a long way to go, but who was, for the first time, walking in the right direction. The journey ahead was still long and uncertain. I didn't know if my wife would ever trust me enough to let me back into her life. I didn't know if I would ever be able to give my children the life I had once promised them. But I was starting to understand that the promises I needed to keep were much simpler. The promise to be present, the promise to be honest, the promise to be responsible. I was rebuilding my life, not from the top down with grand visions and high-risk investments, but from the bottom up with small, consistent acts of integrity. The foundation was still shallow, the walls were still fragile, but for the first time it felt real. It felt strong. And it was a house that no market crash could ever destroy. I've told you my story, now it's your turn. What's the one experience that showed you people aren't always who they seem? Share your answer in the comments and don't forget to like and subscribe.